People who've eaten at restaurants featured on Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. How was the food experience? My family regularly went to the Greek at the harbor before it was on the show. I was very nervous when I found out it was on the show, but luckily it was one of the few episodes I saw that didn't feature a dirty kitchen and disgusting food practices. We then went once after the show. Before the show, the food quality was decent but not spectacular. The atmosphere was pretty good, it was right on the water. The food quality improved slightly after the show, but the price became very expensive, and we decided that as much as we loved the place, it was too overpriced now to return. Never been to the Greek, but they also own Margarita Villa in the harbor. I've never had any problems there, before or after Kitchen Nightmares. I live in the same New Jersey town as the Blackberry's Soul Food Restaurant episode. The show was accurate. The dead rat wasn't planted, and I'm honestly surprised that's all they found based on personal experiences. I will stand by the fact that the staff was better the restaurant and owner deserved. They probably downplayed how awful her personality was when it came to running the business and taking criticism. City Hall was literally right across the street, and I did a few internships there in high school. They would occasionally try to get us to support the business and eat lunch there. As with most restaurants on Kitchen Nightmares, it closed down shortly after. Used to work at that ShopRite and met her once. B thought she was famous, lol. She was with another chef from the restaurant who was super nice. Talked about different marinades for BBQing a pig. Still feels so bad for the grandma though. Been to Prohibition Gastropub in Everett a couple times. Food was pretty decent the times I went, though I hadn't been there before it was on the show. A few years later, Gordon was in town because he was doing the Lake Stevens Half Ironman and stopped unannounced for a meal. From what I remember reading, he was happy to see the people he had helped and had no complaints. I was there the same day after a local beer fest, but must have just missed him. We ate at Prohibition. Food and service were okay. Nothing really special. Seems like they had their crap together. I live in Scottsdale and once went to Amos Baking Company before they were featured on the show. It took over an hour for them to make me a club sandwich. There was an AMA with a ex-waitress from there. She was also the one who was fired on the episode for asking Amy a question. I went to Mike and Millie's in Oakhurst, New Jersey when it was rebranded as a steakhouse, but without knowing that it was featured on the show. So at that point, it was good. It wasn't until later when I was catching up on episodes that I realized that place had been featured. The food was good and the experience was as well. So I was shocked that this was on an episode. Lo and behold, I could see why once I saw it. Their episode got featured in October of 2011 and they were closed by January of 2012. I think I had been there in November of 2011. So I got it all brand new and revamped. Revamped in November and closed by January. I wonder how much that little stunt cost. My wife and I just visited Boston for our second anniversary in October. While we were walking around the North End looking for Italian restaurants, we found La Galleria 33. At the time, we did not realize that this place had been on Kitchen Nightmares. We thought it was a cozy little place with pretty good food and wine, and the service was good. Overall, we liked it a lot. My wife only realized that the place had been on the show after we left, and we were impressed with it. I was a production assistant on a handful of episodes. The food was usually bad, the menu was replaced by the Nightmares team, then most places switched back. We have a little Italian pizza place out here that was featured on Kitchen Nightmares a few years ago. Last fall my husband, my friend and I decided to go try it out. The little old Italian man who ran it on the show is still there. It was so funny when we came in, we stood at the counter to order and he said, "What do you want?" And we're like, lunch? So he sat us down at a table and made us the best dang pizza I've had in a really long time. He kept coming over and very brusquely asking us, "How are you doing?" or "How do you like the food?" It was really good. We were the only people there, so it was really quiet. I speak Italian and the guy was so happy to talk to me. I stood at the counter for about 10 minutes chatting with him in Italian. He told me I was the first person in several years to come in and speak to him in Italian. It was actually really fun. The food was fantastic. I recommend it to all my friends. I hope the place does really well. My dad is from Rome. Growing up, I could always tell which restaurants were authentic by how happy people were when my dad spoke Italian and they treated us like that. What do you want is their way of saying, hey, I'm gonna take care of you. I love it. I ate at a restaurant that was on Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. Get ready, because this is actually a sad story. The place was in my old neighborhood, which was a semi-popular bar shopping district in my city. For backstory, it was run by a couple who inherited the wife's parents' very successful restaurant in another state, but had closed it to open the one that would be featured on the show. From what I could tell, they were nice, hard-working people, but no one in the immediate family had really had any restaurant experience. The problem was that in the other state it was a unique place. In my area it was an Italian place in a neighborhood that was pretty much nothing but Italian places. The episode was awkward. We're not a neighborhood that gets noticed on a national scale very often, so every bar and restaurant on the street had a viewing party for it. So, pretty much the entire neighborhood saw it live, and, throughout the course of the episode, the viewer starts realizing that the husband is seriously depressed. At one point Gordon Ramsay stops acting and sits down to have an honest-to-God intervention with the guy. I felt horrible for having watched the episode, honestly. It felt sickeningly voyeuristic to be participating in this family's legitimate problems. If the guy had been a stranger in another state, I might have felt differently, but he wasn't. He was a real person that I saw every morning smoking a cigarette while I walked to work. I'd stand behind his daughter in line at the coffee shop. He was not a character, and he was not acting for the camera. So, to your actual question, I went there twice after filming. Both times the food was amazing. I'm not just saying that because of guilt. It was actually fantastic. But, as I said before, the food wasn't their problem. What was less fantastic was that the owner would come to your table to talk with you. But he was, how to put this gently, not the best conversationalist. The conversations would start out normal, until he'd segue into telling us how his father died violently in a house fire, or that I should make sure to tell my friends to go there because the place was still failing and he didn't understand why, and so on. They were among the most delicious and saddest meals I've ever eaten. Eating there was on the same level as going out to dinner after my grandmother's funeral. The place seemed like it was doing better after the episode. It looked like it had much more business, anyway, but it closed about 3 years after the episode aired. Gossip around the street is that the place had actually recovered financially, but the landlord thought they could get more money from opening a different kind of establishment. But the place the landlord wanted fell through, so now it's just an empty building in the middle of an otherwise thriving street. I went to La Galleria 33 in Boston specifically because it had been on the show. They reverted back to their original menu, all the food sucked, and they're in a part of town with a lot of amazing restaurants. I honestly have no idea how they're still open. Probably because people go there just because it was on the show. I can do one better, actually. I worked at one. In fact, I helped debut it. Started a week or two before opening. El Greco in Austin, TX. I did not work there anymore at the time of the filming. First of all, let me say this. I always thought Kitchen Nightmares was faked and exaggerated. Now I know it isn't. They actually had to tone this guy down for TV. As far as the food goes, it's a shame, really. When he started the restaurant, he, his mom, and his aunt cooked amazing food from scratch. The best Greek food I've ever had. He insisted on extremely high quality ingredients across the board, causing them to hemorrhage money. He started sleeping later and later, showing up less, and the microwaving of food started. Between increasing drama in the kitchen and decreasing quality of prep and ingredients, incredible food turned bland and mediocre experiences became horrible. I remember that somebody told a vegan that sounded like he was vegan. It has a ton of ground beef in it. The boss, James, would also talk about how he'd like to frick all the female customers. He would take the contents of the safe home every night, just for, you know, safekeeping. He accused us of stealing from the register. We didn't, and told us he would force us to work for free for the amount of time it took him to review the security footage. You can't do that. He told us to stop people from putting napkins under the table legs to stabilize them. If I see one more of these under here, he said. I'll make you walk around with it in your shoe. Do you know what that does? It will freak up your back. I got fired a few months in. Never looked back. So glad that happened. Saw that Kitchen Nightmares episode a few years later and laughed my dong off. It's a real shame. He wasted $800k of his dear old mom's money on that place. Actually, she was kind of a B too, but I loved her nonetheless. I've eaten at the Prohibition, formerly Prohibition Grill, in Everett, Washington. Ate there before I knew it was on the show. The food was overpriced for the quality, really overpeppered, for one thing, and the last bite I had of my food had a giant peppercorn in it, unfortunately for me, and it was too loud to really hear the people at your table. I've never been back there even though it's really convenient to go to. I can see it from my apartment, but from watching the episode, it seems like the owner really did wise up and listen to Gordon. There was no belly dancing while we were there, and all the decor that the Kitchen Nightmares team put up was still there, and this was in 2014. So about a year and a half after the episode was filmed, I think. I'm pretty sure one of the waitresses in the episode was there when I was, so that was cool. But if you're ever in the area, there's plenty of restaurants with better food at better prices, or at least the same quality food at better prices, with a better atmosphere. I recommend the Vintage Cafe, which you can briefly see in the episode. The Vintage is good. Wife and I are big fans of The Irishman. El Paraiso is also pretty good, but Taqueria Al Pastor on Beverly is OMFG amazing. Brooklyn Brothers is legit. There's this Italian place that's been in the community for years. Capri, run by these twin brothers. Used to go with my parents back in the day and it was always good. Packed, pretty good little place for not the greatest location. Convinced my girlfriend to check it out fairly early on in our dating life. Thought it'd be fun, in that cheesily romantic way. Walked in and there was no one. Sat down and received that cold in the middle boiling on the outside microwave goodness. Pretty sure one of us got mild food poisoning from the fish. Laughed it off and saw it on Kitchen Nightmares later that year. Seemed like they lost their drive more than anything. Haven't tried it since, but they're still open with the new design, so best of luck to them. I ate at Jack's Waterfront and Giuseppe's. They both sucked, but the restaurant that replaced Giuseppe's is pretty good now. I also knew a guy that worked at Jack's. He accidentally spilled a pan of hot oil down into his leather boot. When the took his sock off, all the skin came with it. Welp, there goes my lunch. We have one in my town. The lady should have never owned a restaurant. She was nice, but too much of a dreamer. After Gordon's visit, the food was fair, a little pricey for what it was, but the ambience, menu, and overall vibe just didn't go well. The cook Gordon fired opened his own place down the street. People like the food, but it's run like it's either their first or last week in business. It's just chaos. I don't frequent either location. Side note, we also had a bar rescue, same street as the other two restaurants, and they kept the new name and menu for a month, before accepting that a legit sports bar shouldn't be sold to people as a back alley Chinese tapas bar. Back alley Chinese tapas bar. Now there's a set of words that anyone can put together, but under no circumstance should they ever do so. I've told this story before, but it was Restaurant Impossible, not Kitchen Nightmares. I think I went twice after the show. They had a huge menu, 300 items or something ridiculous like that, so none of the stuff was ever fresh. Not really, it was all frozen and reheated. The show basically stripped down their menu and remodeled the place. Honestly, I didn't notice a huge difference in the food. Might have been a little better, but not by a lot. The second time I went, the menu was at least halfway back to its original size. I assume regulars complained that they couldn't get their favorite dishes. They ended up retiring shortly after because they lost the connection with their restaurant. Because they went right back to what they were doing, they were still not doing too well, and the remodel made it seem like a totally different restaurant. I've always wondered if Irvine's advice, while sound for running a restaurant, just goes in one ear and out the other, since the crux of his problem is that all his show's recipients are outsiders to the restaurant industry. I went to a pizza place before and after. Before, the food was good but the decor awful and filthy. After, the food was still good and the decor much better. The menu also had more interesting pizzas. my husband and I visited the Prohibition Grill. You may remember it from the show as having the random belly dancing shows. We did not watch the episode prior to going to the restaurant for happy hour. We asked our waitress, who was very sweet, about being on the show and the changes they had made. It didn't seem like she had much to say other than that the menu was more streamlined. She said it was more streamlined about 6 times. The food was not bad. Shortly after our visit we watched the show and I will never go back because it was so gross. The joint was Sam's Kebab Room. Dad said he tried to eat there twice beforehand. Got food poisoning twice. Gordon Ramsay came through. Restaurant closed soon after. I'm kind of impressed that he went back and tried again. If a place gives me food poisoning, it's dead to me forever. Mangia. Before it was aired on Kitchen Nightmares, you could tell the food was microwaved, and that was about 2 years before that episode. Couple of co-workers actually were on set of its airing. The place doesn't exist anymore. Now it's a Jimmy John's. I believe the drug addict was added because someone like that living in my small town would be known for sure, and nobody seemed to know who he was before that episode aired. Well, long before your time, maybe, just assuming. It was an Arby's and you could get really bad weed at the drive-thru. Thankfully Arby's upped their game and is now at that old steakhouse that was Cruiser's long before that. Tried Amy's Baking Company while I was in Scottsdale many years ago. They actually cooked the fricking pizza. My girlfriend's salad was pretty good too. Was wondering if that episode of Kitchen Nightmares was staged. That skepticism ended once I saw the wife and husband both watching all the patrons in between orders. I felt really uncomfortable. Other than that, I didn't see any drama. I think the husband got deported and they closed the place for good. Basically the same situation. A restaurant near me was featured on Restaurant Impossible a few years ago. I have no idea why. The food, Mexican, before was delicious. Huge portions, cheap, and full of flavor. It was one of my favorite places to eat. After, everything had to be small and fancy looking. They redecorated the whole place so it looked sterile, but didn't have the comfortable, colorful vibe it used to have. They jacked up the prices, and it's not a rich neighborhood, so they lost half their business. The food was bland, portion small, but it did look a lot nicer. This was a few years ago, so they've moved back toward the original style and they're still open, so it must be doing okay. Not a favorite restaurant anymore, though. I've been to Amy's Baking Company 3 times with my friends. The first time was a few months after Kitchen Nightmares and Sammy started going off on us about Gordon Ramsay even though we never said anything about seeing them on TV. Food was pretty mediocre, and Amy kept giving us her alien death stare from the kitchen, but the desserts were legitimately amazing. Like, the best piece of chocolate cake I've ever had. But them acting out on us made it kind of an uncomfortable experience. The second time was more or less the same, but the third time, it seemed like they finally cooled down and heeded Gordon Ramsay's advice. The menu was maybe a third as large. They seemed to actually specialize in certain things. They didn't behave like they were batshit insane. And the food was actually pretty good. Same awesome desserts too. Like, I'd totally go there again if they were still open. I think they finally decided to change because their bad rap from Kitchen Nightmares made them lose too much of their business, and they told us they were likely going to be closing down in a couple months. It was a little sad, but they were pretty nutty people who couldn't get their crap together in time. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure the episode showed that the desserts were pre-made from Costco or something. I lived next to a restaurant that was aired in Bridgeport, CT. My car and apartment is in a shot or two. Cafe Tavolini, Season 4, Episode 9. I had eaten there on many occasions when it first opened, but you could see it lose its way over the years. I was actually surprised at all the crap happening right outside my window. He took over our entire parking lot with a huge RV, which was pretty inconvenient since there wasn't a lot of parking in the neighborhood and it was cold, so walking back to my place kind sucked. The guy worked from his home to run a restaurant. Felt bad for the son who was the only sane one of the group. It's probably the best episode after Amos as far as crazy factor goes. My mom's favorite local pizza place, the Capri in Eagle Rock, CA, was on there. I was really young when we used to go, but we celebrated her fiance's birthday there once and they were pretty rude to us even though they were regulars. so we boycotted them for a while. But we went back and ate there a few times years later after they had been on the show, and the food was worse. According to her, I was too young to really compare the quality, but she was pretty disappointed when we went back. I ate at Oceana in New Orleans a year before that show aired. It was late after our ghost tour. We were on Bourbon Street and wanted a decent meal, so we asked a cop what he suggested. It was terrible. Advertised as seafood, but it was really just terrible Italian food. There was a piece of foil baked into the bread, and I guarantee that place didn't make its own. The scary part for me was that the place was really not good. But I've been to a lot of bad restaurants. After seeing Gordon expose the kitchen conditions, it made me question every place I went after seeing it. Now I want to puke again. I hate that only the comments in the first half hour are seen, because this totally happened to me. I was in New Orleans with my grandma and we picked out a place close to the hotel to eat. I had some kind of gumbo soup and crab pasta. Later that night I woke up because I felt ill. Really ill. I puked and then went back to sleep. Maybe a year or so later I put on Kitchen Nightmares and saw the exact restaurant we had eaten at. Once I saw their seafood storage, it all made sense why it made me sick. My wife and I were looking at reception places for our wedding, and one of the only really upscale restaurants in our small town was recommended. We went and met with the owner, who had a pretty thick French accent, and he was basically telling us what he would serve without really giving us any options. He was just kind of all around pushy about everything, and was also incredibly expensive. Several years later I just happened to see an episode online. I don't regularly watch the show, and there was my small hometown featured with this restaurant. The majority of the problems featured on the show were how this guy was a total control freak and butthole to his employees, which caused food to take hours to be served because the chefs didn't cook it to his standards. I believe it originally aired 7-8 years ago, and the restaurant closed about a year or two ago. I've eaten at Cafe Hon in Baltimore. Aside from the hideous decor, which was basically the same as before the TV show, Gordon's main gripe was that they served overpriced food that wasn't very good. This is still very true. We went for brunch, just out of curiosity, and until that visit I didn't realize that it was possible to make underwhelming French toast. The place isn't disgusting or anything, but it's absolutely not worth what they charge. I ate the Greek during the filming and it was pretty bad, and I never made it on TV because I nervously looked directly into the camera. Cafe Hon. It's pretty much just diner food. It hasn't always will survive off of tourist traffic for its atmosphere. I don't think the show really revealed how much the city hated her for trademarking the word Hon. Even though she gave up the trademark for the show, a lot of people still dislike her for it. In reality, she made a lot of money off of it while she had the trademark and pretty much sued anyone she could over it. It should be noted she only trademarked a sticker with the word Hon on it, but went on to sue anyone who used the word Hon on any souvenir or as part of a slogan. So all the community hate this woman brought on herself then played the victim when it blew up in her face. Literally went through this whole thread hoping to find a Cafe Hon comment. That woman was terrible. I thought it seemed that the city really hated her in the episode. Didn't realize it was worse. I haven't been to a Kitchen Nightmares one, that I know of, but I did go to a restaurant, Impossible Restaurant, both before and after the rescue. It was a place that was a staple in the KC area, Poco's on the boulevard. Unfortunately, I believe the original owner died and her children ran it into the ground. It wasn't a quality thing, from what I could tell, because I enjoyed my meal there. Standard quasi-Mexican food, hard to mess up really. Restaurant. Impossible came through and renovated the space from a cheesy Chili's style to what IMHO looked like a Chili's that was trying to be classier. I didn't see what the point of the renovation was. I also didn't see a change in the food, really, when I went back. Now whether that's because the owners didn't actually want to change their ways, or if it was just all an elaborate setup by the show and the only real work was the facelift, IDK. It closed last year and the owners moved to a much smaller, carry-out type location whose previous tenant only lasted 3 months. It appears they're still there. The old location is now the site of a local pizza chain, so I'm not complaining there. I lived down the street from Amy's Baking Company in Scottsdale, and every time we went to try it, it was closed. Not permanently closed, but a sign on the door during normal hours that they were closed. We saw the episode and went back to ABC and it was actually still in business, but not a lot of people were there. The place eventually closed down permanently and since been replaced with, I believe, coconut fish tacos. Not a loss from us in Scottsdale. Not kitchen nightmares but bar rescue. 2 bars in my town were on the show. Both had their names changed by the show and both changed their names back only weeks after the show left. One is doing very well and the other is closed. The funny thing is, many of the bartenders worked at both locations and can be seen in both episodes. La Campana in Fairlawn, NJ. First season of Kitchen Nightmares. The place was empty, the food was mediocre. The meatballs were pretty good though. I remember it was a highlight of the episode, promoting meatballs. Not as fratty as the restaurant appeared in the episode. Unfortunately, some years after the show, the owner killed himself. La Campana closed and now it is called Sage. Never been there. Not kitchen nightmares, but I went to the Olive Pit that was featured on Bar Rescue. The show focused a lot on getting the kitchen up to snuff and showed a nice looking pork slider or something like that. When I went, the kitchen was closed and they were in between cooks. That was a letdown. I tried the drink they made up on the show, though, and it was pretty tasty. A Long Island iced tea made with Sprite and OJ. I went to Osarana Grill twice a while after the episode aired. First time was in the morning, so I had to order the breakfast menu. Second time, I had the seafood gumbo. Both times, the food was pretty bland. Not gross, just very mediocre. The restaurant was also much smaller than what it looked like on the show, and there was only one other group there both times. I didn't see anyone there that I recognized from the show. There's a Greek restaurant in town. When we moved here we were excited to try it, but it was inevitably underwhelming. Tired menu, dull food, dark and dated atmosphere, slow service. Some people love it, though, so we'd get dragged there from time to time. Finally I had enough mediocre moussaka and announced no more. When it was on Kitchen Nightmares, I think it was as the original owner's kids were taking over. We went after the intervention, before the episode aired. There were some slapdash improvements to the interior. The menu was actually interesting, not your typical standard Greek menu circa 1990. The food was amazing. The service was super slow. But despite that we went back a couple times. Pretty quickly, though, they went back to all the old standby fare, saying it was all back by popular demand. Yes, bland, fatty food is popular, and if you're blotto on ouzo who cares, right? If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.